We have seen an increase in violence in our prisons, and I think that is simply because there are not enough people to monitor on any given shift. And some people might say that talking about it out loud is a security concern, but I think the people who are in our custody and the folks who are committing the violent acts in our prisons already know what the staffing situation is like. Our staff is in danger because we cannot pay to bring more people on staff for them, and so it is already a crisis.
North Carolina's prison system is struggling with hundreds of vacant positions as the starting pay remains stuck around $18 an hour. From Forest City to Fairfield, you're listening to the WUNC Politics Podcast. I'm Colin Campbell, Capitol Bureau Chief at WUNC News. As the legislature returns to Raleigh in April, lots of state agencies are asking for overdue funding and pay increases after going much of the past year without a state budget. But the money troubles are especially dire for the state's prison system. Correctional officers are leaving in droves for better pay elsewhere. There's not enough money to pay the bills for basic operations, and the state's 55 prison facilities have more than $1 billion in deferred maintenance needs, from air conditioning systems to fire alarms. To better understand how the legislature's budget impasse is affecting North Carolina's prison system, I sat down with its leader at the headquarters of the Department of Adult Corrections in Raleigh. Leslie Dismukes was appointed by Governor Josh Stein to serve as Secretary of the Department of Adult Correction when Stein took office in 2025. She'd previously worked with Stein as the Criminal Bureau Chief for the NC Department of Justice, and she's been a prosecutor, both as an assistant U.S. attorney in North Carolina and an assistant district attorney in Mecklenburg County. Secretary Dismukes, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me.
Glad to be with you today.
So I want to start out with the comment from the governor that got my attention during a recent press conference. He says the budget for the state's prison system is getting dire.
For the past year, the DAC has been forced into the untenable position of having to ask vendors to float them on their bills. That is not responsible budgeting for a household. It is surely not the way a $2 billion state agency to manage our state prisons should operate.
So elaborate on his comments, if you can, about being unable to pay bills and sort of asking vendors to have to delay payments from Department of Adult Correction.
Sure. We have two very distinct and very large budgetary issues in our agency. The first is that our operational budget is simply insufficient for the agency's needs. And the second is that our budget for personnel, our staffing for the payroll, is completely insufficient. So what that ends up meaning for our agency is that we are having to set aside the money just to make payroll. And when we have the remainder of that money, it is not enough to pay the cost of our daily bills. So we are, as the governor mentioned, we are delaying payments for bills. Some of them are up to 120 days old because we are simply unable to make those payments with the base budget that we have right now.
And is there concern that some of those vendors may sort of stop providing services at some point? I mean, what point are they unwilling to say, we'll give you credit for a few more months?
It has happened. It has happened. We try to move the money around to pay the most critical needs at any moment, but it's hard to determine what those are when you are caring for and feeding, housing, paying for medical needs for 32,000 people. We have not seen a substantial change in our budget in the last several cycles, and so the cost of inflation obviously is hitting everyone, and we are not excluded from that. So when you think about how do you make those choices about whether we're going to pay for the gas bill this month or the water bill, or we're going to pay to put bread on the table for the people literally that are in our facilities, it's a very difficult decision to make. What we have tried to do is to push off payments to larger and other state agencies so that we can pay small vendors and small businesses who, for some of them, we are their largest customer. We don't want to have an outsized impact on these small businesses across North Carolina by not being able to pay our bills to them. So we are constantly shifting and trying to pay the bills as they come, but also make sure that we are coursing out what we can pay because we don't have enough money to pay all of them right now.
How much of this stems from the lack of a state budget? I mean, is this the sort of thing where normally every 2 years the legislature looks at what the needs are and what the cost increases have been and sort of fund the department accordingly to what the increase in the cost is going to be?
Sure. I think without having a budget, we just cannot keep up. When we go through the budget cycle, we talk about what our increased needs are. We talk about how the costs of things have changed so that we try to account for that in what the legislature gives us. But without having a budget, we can't account for any of that. It is simply inadequate, the amount that we were given 3, 4, 5 years ago that we are now having to deal with in 2026. It does not pay the bills these days.
Mm-hmm. Is it mostly inflation, or are there other sort of cost increases that you've seen either from more people in the prison prison population or anything like that?
Sure. I mean, the inflation definitely has hit us in things like food and clothing. I mean, that is, I think, what all Americans are facing, but we face that in our system as well. But then I really think the rising cost of medical care, and that for us is pharmaceutical bills, but it's also things like outside medical trips, things that we are having to resort to because of staffing issues and also because of the fact that we cannot recruit doctors and nurses because we cannot compete with salaries. And so medical is a huge part of that. And the prison population is growing and it is aging. And so with the aging population comes huge additional medical needs that we are meeting, we are constitutionally obligated to meet, and that's very expensive.
So in the past, it would be you in most cases see somebody within the facility who's a state employee working in that prison for your basic medical care. And it sounds like now, if that position's not filled, then you have to transport someone off-site to a privately owned facility. Is that sort of the situation?
So we do still try to do most of the basic medical care in our facilities or at Central Prison at our medical complex or at NCCIW where we treat the women. But we do have an outsized number of specialty medical trips that we are taking to hospitals, and it takes 2 correctional officers per outside trip per individual. And so those people are folks who are coming off post. So then we are having a staffing crisis within the prison to go outside. Then we are paying for the additional higher cost of care for that third-party specialty provider.
Do you have a sense for sort of the dollar figure that's needed to get up to speed on some of these ongoing needs in terms of vendor payments and just general operational costs?
Sure. So we are at any given moment in 2026, $100 million behind in our bills. And so as recognized by the governor's critical needs budget, $80 million would really help us get to a place where we are paying bills on time, and then we are able to keep up with our quarterly allotments and move forward. So that's really kind of a magic number for us to get us to break even. But I will also say that that is the number that we need to catch up. That is not the number that we need to make our ability to pay moving forward sustainable. We have got to right-size our base budget based on the current operational needs of our agency, and if we cannot do that, then we will be in the same place again.
How do the budget constraints impact what you're able to do for inmates in the state prisons, whether it's healthcare, mental health services that they might need, or even just programs designed to build their skills so that they can ultimately be successful once they're released?
Sure. An insufficient budget negatively impacts everything. So when we are not well funded to recruit, when we are the second lowest in the nation in our CO starting salaries at $37,000 a year, which translates to roughly $18 an hour, we cannot recruit people to run safe prisons. If we can't run a safe prison, then we cannot run our programming. If we cannot run programming for the people in our custody, we are releasing people from custody who are not educated, who are not given a skill, who are not given a good case plan to return home. And when that happens, our communities aren't safe. And so the lack of a budget to be able to provide for those basic things in custody impacts directly the public safety in our state.
Are you seeing any increase in the recidivism rate? It's a hard word to say, but more people getting out of prison and then committing other crimes that land them right back behind bars?
We haven't looked at the recidivism rates particularly since we have been having such a budget crisis, and those numbers are studied kind of in longer trends, 3-5 years, that kind of thing. But I will say it's hard to imagine that they have not been impacted, right? When we cannot provide the services that we need to provide to people to make sure they do not come back and spend time in our custody, then we are only going to see growing crime rates.
The other big issue, and you've touched on it obviously right now, is the staffing situation. Here's a clip from what the governor said on that front recently as he called for pay raises for correctional officers.
The state also ranks 49th in the country for starting pay for correctional officers. We're asking people to put themselves in a very demanding, albeit rewarding job, asking their families to sacrifice on our behalf so that they can earn less money than they could if they worked at a Costco.
So how many vacant positions are you talking about right now, and what impact does that have on your day-to-day operations in these facilities?
Sure. So what we have done is try to study what does it take to run a safe facility. What is it safe for each of our facilities? What is the number of correctional officers we need? And we call that our post chart number. And right now we have roughly 4,600 correctional officers working, and we need roughly 9,600. And so we are 5,000 short of running safe prisons. That is a drastic number. That is, we need 50% more correctional officers to run a safe system. And we cannot do that with the salaries that we've got right now. We cannot recruit. And more importantly, we cannot retain. We are losing talented people, dedicated people who, for years now, we have been saying to them, just hold on till we get a budget. Just hold on until we can try to get your step increase. Just hold on until we can get that LMAR money to recognize the compression issues above the steps. And we have not been able to make good on that because we do not have a budget. And so we cannot keep people. They are tired of hearing just hold on. We have got to get a budget.
What are some of the sort of competing fields that people go into, other places where they can easily make more money, and then it's hard for them to make the case to themselves that, I should stay put in this job because it's really important work?
Sure. And so people can stay in important work and make more money. Most of the sheriff's offices that have detention facilities, they pay more than we do. All of our surrounding states, everyone in the southern region, to do what we do, they pay more than we do. You can go into other types of public safety work, and they pay more than we do. We literally are at the bottom of the pay scale.
So you mentioned sort of being lower than what you need to safely run a prison. What kind of safety issues are you seeing, and how do you manage the fact that the number of people working on the job right now is way lower than what's considered to be like the safe level that you want to have staffing-wise? Sure.
So we have seen an increase in violence in our prisons, and I think that is simply because there are not enough people to monitor on any given shift. And some people might say that talking about it out loud is a security concern, but I think the people who are in our custody and the folks who are committing the violent acts in our prisons already know what the staffing situation is like. Our staff is in danger because we cannot pay to bring more people on staff for them, and so it is already a crisis. Those numbers, I think, will only continue to go up if we cannot stick our finger in the dam and start to retain the good people and start to recruit more people. We've been recruiting great. We recruited last year maybe 2,400 or so people. 2,600 or so people. We lost roughly 2,400 people last year. And so we're recruiting fine, but if we are also losing because people are tired and they are burned out from mandatory overtime and from driving long distances to work in a place there where they don't have a lot of other support from their other staff that work with them, we're going to continue to lose those folks.
I know we had the incident, I don't know how many years ago it was, I think in Pasquotank County, where you had a couple of correctional officers who died as the result of a violent incident that occurred. Is that something that sort of worries you, that if we don't solve this problem soon, we're running an elevated risk of seeing that kind of incident occur again?
It absolutely does. In 2017, when we lost the officers who were part of our family, we had a lot of officers who were still working with us, who were still affected by that loss as well. And those types of things could happen easily tomorrow. We, as an agency across our system, are more poorly staffed today than we were in 2017 when that happened at Pasquotank, and that is something that scares me.
And you mentioned the overtime issue. I mean, what are staffers who are there having to look at in terms of how many hours of overtime they have to work just to kind of hit the bare minimum of how many people are in the building at a given time?
Sure. And so thinking about it this way, I just took a visit to one of our facilities this morning, and we were talking about the mandatory overtime, because we are not in a position where we are asking people to work overtime. We are having to mandate it just to make sure that we can adequately staff our facilities. So that looks like 4 to 5 additional days per week where people are working 12-hour shifts. So instead of working 3 on and 2 off on a 12-hour shift, and anyone who's ever worked a 12-hour shift knows that is a very long day, particularly on night shift, they're working 4 and 5 12-hour shifts in a row, and that is brutal. It's brutal on our staff and on the morale and on their bodies and their families and their childcare situation. The mandatory overtime situation is costing us $6 to $8 million a month, and it is costing our people in morale and in their health, and we've got to get a handle on it.
Is there a sense that the money that's spent on that you could easily sort of repurpose towards, if you had the authorization due to higher salaries, and then you would have less of that mandatory overtime taking place?
Sure. That's the thing. A rising tide lifts all ships, right? If we can get the salaries to go up, we will be able to retain the people who will then get raises automatically from the steps going up. We will be able to recruit more people to work with them. That way, fewer people will have to work any overtime, and the ones that do it could be elective instead of mandatory. And then everyone's situation is improved and everyone feels better, and it kind of, the better situation begets a better situation. But we have got to get to that threshold, which we cannot do without raises.
So what's the sort of appropriate starting pay? What kind of raises do you need to sort of get where you want to be? We
need at least 10%. The governor recognized in the critical needs budget that 10% for correctional officers and nurses. Nursing is a big vacancy in our agency also, would really get us across the threshold of we would come up to around $41,000 as a starting salary, which is more respectable than $37,000. But it would also affect the steps above that, and that really would help us with retention. That's going to be a significant boost in morale, I think, to retain staff, and that's where we start to plug the holes where we can then recruit with a reasonable salary, but we can retain the folks in the step there.
And I guess the steps issue is when you take one of these jobs, right, you're looking at a salary scale that says I get a certain number of years of experience in, I'm going to automatically get this step increase. And I imagine that's got to be hard on morale when people were sort of promised that and it's not come in the timely fashion that they expected.
That's right. So back in the beginning, when we first did not get a budget, we were not able to move people within the steps even. The legislature did correct that, and so we have now been able to move them within the steps, but we have not been able to change what the steps are, and so that is a problem for us.
Are you concerned about additional staffing dips and what that might do if action's not taken soon to sort of stem the tide of some of these vacancies?
If we do not have action during this legislative session, it is going to be an absolute disaster for our agency. We are experiencing an increase in the folks coming into custody, and what that means is we are supervising more people with fewer staff, and so our staff are getting even more burned out. And the longer, as I mentioned earlier, we go, when we're telling them, please just hold on, there comes a breaking point for every human being where they say, this job is not worth that. And I worry very much that if we do not get some relief in the next 2 or 3 months, then we are going to lose even more staff. And we also had our staff, I'll give you a good example. We had our staff run the numbers for not just what our ideal post chart looks like, so what it looks like, how many do we need to run a safe prison, but what is our critical post number? We are only 328 officers above critical. And critical means you just can't run it at all with fewer people than that. 328 in an agency of 14,000 employees, that is a very slim margin. And any dip in that would be catastrophic.
I understand there are some facilities that have open beds but aren't able to fill those because of staffing. At what point do you have to send people somewhere else, or what is the solution really if you have more people in the prison system as inmates than you have the sort of mandatory minimum amount of staff to supervise them?
Sure. So in our footprint, we have roughly 36,000 beds, and that is physical bed spaces and dorms that could hold folks or cells that could hold people. We cannot staff anywhere close to that. In fact, we shouldn't be staffing over 32,000 right now, but we are. We're over 32,000 people in custody. And so we do have entire wings of prisons that are sitting empty where we are paying to keep up the maintenance of those because we don't have the staff for them. And we cannot send people anywhere else because we don't have any facilities that have open beds that are better staffed than the ones who aren't well staffed. And so there's nowhere to shift them to. And where we start to feel that is in what we call the jail backlog. Those are people who are waiting to come into our custody from the local jails. And we are on a backlog of folks that we are paying to the sheriffs to keep housed in their local jails. And some of them are at capacity too. And so it is really a trickle-down problem. We cannot take them in safely because we don't have the people to supervise them, and the number is growing, and the sheriffs are going to start to face the same problem. And so without some relief, we are really all going to be in a big mess.
I know a lot of prisons are located in rural communities. Does this make recruiting easier or harder, and are there impacts that you see to those communities when a significantly fewer number of people is employed at one of these locations?
Sure. So we do have I would say an outsized impact on rural communities because for some of them we are the largest utility user, right? And so it's important that we run that facility and that we staff that facility and we fill it up so that we can then be the economy for that community. Also, we're the largest employer in some of our rural communities. But the problem is if we can't find enough people in those rural communities to hire, then we are in danger of not being able to run that particular prison, which would have a negative impact on the community, and we don't want to do that.
Outside of pay, are there other things that you can do to sort of recruit and retain, or does it really come down to, people need to be paid a wage that makes it worth doing this work?
we have run several studies and we've done pulse surveys and tried to survey our staff to understand what does it take to get here and what does it take to keep you, right? What could we do to keep you on board? And a lot of it is morale and culture and things that we are trying to do to improve the employee experience. And so we're doing those things. We are bringing on board new technologies that we hope will streamline the work experience for our employees and also make their jobs more efficient and effective. And we hope that that will improve their experience and their morale with us. So we're doing some of those things. Some of that stuff costs a lot of money. Some of that stuff we can do without a lot of money. But at the end of the day, if we don't have a respectable wage to pay them to honor the work that they are doing, we are never going to make any headway. We have to be able to respect the work that they are doing by paying them accordingly.
I know facility needs are also an issue for the prison system. Are there prisons that need major maintenance or upgrades and various systems to sort of make them both safe, but also just a tolerable environment for both the people who work and live there?
Sure. So the term deferred maintenance was not something I really spent a lot of time thinking about before taking this job. Our agency has $1.4 billion in deferred maintenance. That means not things that we know will break in the future and we'll need to replace. That is things that are broken right now and have to be replaced right now. We still do not have fully air-conditioned facilities. We are on fire watch, which means a human being walking around to make sure that our prisons don't burn because our fire systems are so outdated. Some of this maintenance is so critical that it is what we call a life safety need. And we are unable to meet that because we don't have the money in our operating budget to pay the bills to pay our utilities, much less to fix things that are already wrong within the prisons and within our footprint. And if you think about it in terms of the fiscal cliff, right? I think that we are projected to lose, I think it's $2.8 billion, right, if we continue along the path that we're on. And just our agency could use $1.4 billion to make sure that we have basic safety like fire and air conditioning met. So those are some pretty stark numbers.
I know air conditioning has been something that's been an issue for a while, and I know the department has been working towards that. Has that kind of had to stall out with all these other budgetary pressures in terms of being able to start building the systems that would allow some of these facilities to not be probably unpleasantly hot in the North Carolina summer months?
We are so close. And we keep the air conditioning tracker, the percentage tracker, on our website so that everybody can monitor it in real time. But we do need at least $11 million more to finish that project. And if we don't get that, we are still not going to be fully air conditioned as an agency. And some of our oldest prisons, who can be the hottest because of airflow issues and everything else, are completely unair conditioned. And that's not just an issue for the folks in our custody. It's also an issue for our staff, and it is a recruitment and retention problem because no one wants to go work in those conditions.
Do you see health issues stemming from that when you have a particularly hot summer? I don't know what kind of temperatures some of these indoor spaces may get up to, but I imagine it's it gets into those territory of heat illnesses potentially.
They do, and so we have protocols for that and policies, and tried to provide bottled water, but also Gatorade to make sure we're replenishing electrolytes for the folks in our custody and for staff. But there's only so much you can do, and it is very difficult to make those conditions comfortable.
And you mentioned the fire alarm systems. If someone is on fire watch and they're having to just walk around the building and look for signs of a fire, I assume one that's not as accurate a detection as having actual functioning smoke detectors in all the places you normally would, but I assume that also takes them away from other duties that you're struggling to find staff to do anyway.
It does. If someone is on fire watch, then they are not working a different post where we might need them for a security post. And also, it's not just the detection of fire that's an issue, but it's also things like the ventilation systems and the CO2 fans and things like that are completely broken. One of our facilities, and this is when it really kind of coalesced for me that this was a huge problem in our agency, I went to visit one of our prisons and looked at the dashboard that is the old fire system. They can't turn it on because if you do, it constantly beeps, and they can't repair it because it's so obsolete they no longer make the parts. And we have that problem in many of our facilities where there are systems and processes where they don't even make the parts for it anymore. So it's a complete overhaul that's necessary.
So we're talking a building where there's no real way to activate the fire alarm system that either will go off malfunctioning constantly or it will not activate at all to where people are notified that there's a fire and you need to activate the evacuation protocols you'd have in these facilities.
Exactly. It's not just the notification, it's the whole thing. It's completely obsolete.
And I assume that's got to be a major safety issue if you were to have a fire in a prison facility, because I imagine that's evacuating one of those places is not as simple as evacuating an office building or something like that.
That's exactly right. You can't just pull the alarm and everybody go outside, right? We have to do count. We have to make sure that folks go into a secure space, and that is a very tricky issue.
So outside of those, obviously that's a long, long list, but any other big issues for the Department of Adult Corrections that we didn't address that are sort of on your wish list as we get into the legislature potentially putting some more funding this direction?
I do think we didn't talk a lot about rehabilitation reentry. We talked about what happens when we can't provide those services, but one of the big things that our agency is working on is Reentry 2030, and I think that taking the whole of government approach that we are doing through the Joint Reentry Council with our other cabinet agencies, we are making good progress there. And a lot of that we are doing because we have community partners and stakeholders who have gotten involved in helping us fund some of those initiatives. And that, I think, is going really well. The community response to that has been really good. So I'm very proud of that. But we do need money to fund those initiatives too, both inside and then outside. And, we also haven't talked a lot about our probation and parole officers. One half of our agency is the folks in our custody, but I have got 2,200 probation and parole officers on the road who are supervising more than 78,000 people on probation in North Carolina, which is a huge number of folks. They're carrying very large caseloads, and they're often out trying to do home contacts in places that are remote or perhaps potentially unsafe. And so we have worked really hard to try to bring online a safety package for them, and we'll be fully deployed with body cameras for all of our probation parole officers by the end of April, and have significant number of training tools that we are bringing online as a part of that. So I'm really proud of our efforts to keep our folks safe, even when we are having other struggles. And so they do really hard work, and we need to make sure that we are keeping our folks safe.
Are you seeing salary and retention issues on the probation and parole side as well, or is it more acute on the prison side?
It's more acute on the prison side, but we are still seeing it in probation and parole. They're carrying caseloads of roughly 70 folks per officer, and that's too high. It's not ideal. And the governor's critical needs budget also recognized that they need a 6.5% increase to get us up to what is a more competitive pay rate with our peers across the Southeast region for probation and parole as well.
And is the effect of you're short-staffed in that area that these folks who are on probation or parole are having fewer interactions and check-ins with their officer to make sure they're meeting all the conditions of their release?
That's right, because whether it's a home contact or an office contact, or just whether we are able to spend the time looking at an individual's case file to determine what services we want to connect them to, if your caseloads are too high, you're not going to be able to do that as well as you would like to.
So as we've wrapped up, you've got one of the tougher jobs in state government, I think, has sort of been clear from this conversation. And I know after working in other aspects of the criminal justice system, what made you want to take on this role leading the Department of Adult Corrections when I assume you got the call from the governor a year or so ago about this position being something he was trying to appoint? Sure.
I think for me, it brings it full circle, right? I've worked as a prosecutor in several different ways, and at DOJ, alongside the governor, then Attorney General Stein, we worked on a lot of different initiatives that touched all the pieces of the criminal justice system. And so for me, this is a huge back end of the system that makes a very big difference as to whether people come back into the system. And so I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to work in this job.
Leslie Dismukes is North Carolina's Secretary of Adult Correction. Thanks so much for speaking with me.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for this week's episode. If you have any feedback on the podcast or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Blue Sky and X at Raleigh Reporter, or you can contact me through our website, WUNC.org. I'm Colin Campbell. Thanks for listening.
Each story you hear on Planet Money starts with a question. What happens if we refund tariffs? Why are groceries so expensive? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious, because the forces shaping our world can be hard to see. Follow NPR's Planet Money wherever you get your podcasts and start seeing how the economy really works.